Open your ears to the song. Today will be a joyful day, and to rejoice and come in.
Good morning. Welcome to UUCC, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua. We are a group of spiritual freethinkers who gather to celebrate life, build community, and better the world. Wherever you are in your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. I'm Laura Wink, your worship associate today, and the service will be led today by our minister, Eileen Casey Campbell. Thank you to everyone on this morning's worship team, including music by Bill Mells and Children's Church for Children 3 and Over by Nancy Reed and Kaya Mells. If this is your first visit, welcome. We invite you to sign the visitor's book in the entryway, and whether it's your first visit or your 1,000th, we're glad that you came. This service is also being live streamed to our YouTube channel. We plan to continue with hybrid worship services throughout the church year so that you can join us each week here in person on Zoom or later on YouTube. To help us connect better with our friends watching from home, please turn around and wave to the camera. Hi, everybody. At the end of the service, we will invite our friends on Zoom to turn their cameras on and return the wave. We have a few announcements today. If you have a joy or sorrow to share, please fill out the card on your chair. We invite you to bring those forward and place them in the basket up there after Bill rings the chimes and begins to play. You can also come forward to drop a puddle in the water at that time if you have a joy or sorrow that you'd prefer not to share out loud. For our announcements today, please take a moment to fill out a quick survey on the holidays and celebrations during our worship year at UUCC. You can find it in the weekly announcements email, and it's shared on our Facebook page. This will help us plan for how best to hold all of our spiritual needs and observances throughout the year. Please try to complete that by tomorrow at 5 p.m. This Friday, November 22nd, will be our fourth Friday drop-in spiritual deepening dinner with potluck from 6 to 6:30 and discussions from 6:30 to 7:30. This is a less formal format than our small groups, but we will delve into the seasonal packet, and participants do not need to have that reviewed ahead of time. We'll have it there. Children are welcome. And you can find the packet at, it's not a screen. There, find it there. Next Sunday, November 20th, after the service will be our social and environmental justice meeting, where we will continue to go over what we learned from our climate justice revival and set goals for the rest of the year and beyond, and select our service partners. Please join us to share what you're passionate about. And there are, I think, a few more announcements.
I have an announcement about our book group. We are doing a common read of a psalm for the Wild Belt, which is, as you can see, a very thin little novel. You can get through it in a lazy weekend. And then we're going to talk about it together while we eat dinner together over Zoom on December 5th. You can find a sign-up link for that in our newsletter. And you can find this book at your local library, probably, especially if your local library is Wood Library downtown. If you would sign up, that would be great, but please don't not show up if you want to participate and you haven't signed up. We just want to get an idea of how many people to be ready for. So definitely come even if you forgot to sign up. And then with perfect timing, we have an announcement from the fundraising team as well that Abby will give. I'm so happy I didn't have to remember the details.
Hello. The fundraising committee is going to set up a table in the back of the church beginning the first week in December with some handmade crafts that we're going to sell through the holiday season. And we're soliciting your crafts. So if you have anything that you're working on for your friends and family to give out as gifts this year, whether you're knitting, beading, cooking, whatever it is, please start bringing that in after Thanksgiving. We will have a space set up for you to put them out. Once the holiday is over, you get to take it home if it's not sold. But you can leave it there for the holiday season if it's non-perishable. Did I get everything?
I think you got it.
All right.
Are there any other announcements? Okay, as we prepare to be fully together, I remind us all to silence our phones and devices. We now enter a space of worship. And now is the time to bring forward any joys or sorrows. And we also invite you to come forward to drop a pebble in the water if you have a joy or sorrow that you prefer not to share. Now is the time to light the chalice. Maria and Paulo, would you like to come up? We're done. Please join me in our words as the flame is lit. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope with sign of truth and meaning. Thank you.
Celebration.
The life we share together.
From all that dwell below the skies, let faith and hope with love arise. Let beauty, truth, and good be sung through every land, in every tongue.
You all want to hear a joke? I feel like we could use a joke, right?
You're here.
This joke was actually my first exposure to Unitarian Universalism, as told to me by my one UU friend in high school. How many Unitarian Universalists does it take to screw in a light bulb? However many we can gather, but it's not going to get us above cult status. It's funny, because it conflates how small we are as a denomination, about 100,000 members across the US and Canada, with being a cult. And as a kid who grew up Catholic, about 1.3 billion with a B members across the world, I thought it was hilarious. Once, at First Unitarian in Rochester's solstice service, which was a night service in the round around a fire with chanting and drumming and pagan ritual, Brian and I sat in the choir loft because I was on the staff and we knew it would be packed down below where everybody else was sitting. We got about 1,000 people over 2 services when I worked there. And a couple of newcomers who couldn't find seats down below showed up in the choir loft right before the service was about to start and sat in front of us, introduced themselves as first-time visitors, and then the drumming and the chanting began and the lights went down. And Brian leaned in and whispered to me, "This is not going to help our reputation for not being a cult, is it?" It's funny because it conflates our non-Christian ritual practices to cult behavior. One more cult story. So Reverend Sherry, who's now the minister at First Unitarian, met her wife Elizabeth when they both worked at a coffee shop. And after talking for one afternoon, Elizabeth, a born and raised New England UU, produced one of those little red bookmarks with the principles and sources on it. If you're an old-time UU, you remember them. We've got some in the basement. And invited Sherry to try out Unitarian Universalism. And Sherry's initial response was, "What is this, some kind of cult?" Obviously, she was not too turned off by those culty religious tracts to not join the church, become a minister, and then also marry Elizabeth. And as Elizabeth likes to put it in many dinner table toasts, what a good get for the cult. It's funny because it conflates even the lowest key invitation to one of our churches to predatory cult recruitment tactics. And I think it's funny because it doesn't hit that hard. Like, we're small and non-traditional in our practices and generally bad at explaining to people what goes on here. But we can laugh about it because that's not what a cult is. Because we are so far from a high control group. We're, I believe, sometimes one of the most frustratingly low control groups a person can join. We're notoriously disinterested in telling people how to believe, behave, associate, or feel. And I think that's why we come to church. It's also why just as often we go to brunch instead. I'm okay with that. There is a freedom inherent in our relationships here that's built on the understanding that love that is radically different from how authoritarian values view it. We believe in a love that looks like connection, like communion, and not like control. And it's time, I think, high time, for us to be loud and proud of that. So would you rise in body or in spirit and sing with us our first hymn, number 296, in your gray hymnal. Now it's time for a story. So if you're a small person, or even if you're a big person, and you want to hear the story a little better, feel free to come sit on the rug up front. You can come up now or at any time during the story, and you can move your bodies how you feel called. This story is called Scheherazade and the 1001 Nights. Has anybody ever heard of this story before? Props to Rory in your little office in the back corner? Okay. Sure. The story goes like this, and I will start by telling you it's a story about stories. In fact, it's a story about 1001 stories. It started, as so many stories start, with a nasty king. He was a pretty bad guy. And here's why. He kept getting married, which isn't a terrible thing, but he kept getting married and then feeling so dissatisfied with his bride that by the morning after their wedding feast, he would have her executed, and then the next day arrange a new marriage. And in fact, he would have one of his advisors arrange it for him. And he would get married and then feel about his wife, and the next day have her executed, and then get married again. And he went through so many women that he ran out of options. And then he went to his advisor and he said, arrange a marriage with your daughter. The advisor had two daughters, an older one named Scheherazade, who is in the title of the story, and a younger one who doesn't get a name in the story. And the advisor knew that he would be executed if he didn't, and questionably still, I think. He arranged the marriage. And so his oldest daughter, Scheherazade, married this bad king, and she went to the wedding feast afterward, and she knew that by morning he was sure to be dissatisfied with her and send her to the executioners, and that the next day it would be her little sister's turn. And so Scheherazade had a plan. See, she was a fabulous storyteller. She liked to tell stories at night to her little sister. And so as the wedding feast started to wind down, she said, "My king, my husband, I'd like to tell you a story." And she started to tell a story about a beggar who found a magic lamp and made wishes with a genie. And the story went on, and it got more and more exciting. And just when she got to the most exciting part, the sun started to come up, and she looked outside and she said, "Oh, bummer. It's morning, so we'll have to stop there, I guess. I could tell you the rest tomorrow night, if you like." And the king had to find out what happened at the end of the story. Have you ever felt that way? Like, you've got to know what happens next. That's how he felt. And so he did not execute Scheherazade that morning. He kept her alive. And the following night, after dinner, she started to tell the end of the story. And she finished it, and then she started another story about a stonecutter who gets turned into a mountain, and then turned into a tree, and then turned into the wind, and went on and on all through the night until the sun started to come up. And then she left it on a cliffhanger at the most exciting part, and she said, "Oh, bummer, sun's coming up. I could tell you the rest tomorrow, if you like." And so she stayed alive for another day. And then the next night, she finished that story because, of course, she lived to see the next night. And then she started a new one about pirates sailing and magic on the seas and sea creatures coming up and over the boats. And then she stopped because the sun was coming up, and she said, "Bummer, it's morning. I could finish it tomorrow if you like." And she did that for 1,001 nights, which is almost 3 years. I'm not very good at math. Maybe more than 3 years? Somewhere around 3 years. 3 years she did this until she finally finished the 1,001st story. And by that point, the king had become not just satisfied, but in love with Scheherazade. Because he had gotten to know her, because he had spent 3 years every night listening to her tell story after story. And his heart was moved. And so not only did he keep her alive after she finished the last story, but he grew to love her, and they worked together in partnership, and she became a very powerful queen. And in fact, he became a not so bad king after all those nights of stories. And that is the end of our story. We won't go on till morning. Thank you for being such good listeners.
Traveling music. Now is the time in our service to join together in the spiritual practice of generosity. Our gifts of both time and money support our church in its work. Each week, we would like to spotlight a group or committee and thank them for their gift of time. This week, the group is the fundraising team. Woo woo! People interested in finding out more can contact me or Abby and join us in our work. 1/4 of our plate collection for the darkness season will go to our service partner, but we need your help to figure out who that will be. During the last meeting of the Social and Environmental Justice Committee, we worked to combine the information we gathered in the Climate Justice Revival to make a plan to guide our efforts during this church year and beyond. Please take some time to look at the lists on the table in the back of the room and think about which path calls to you the loudest, and join us in our next Justice Sunday, which is next week, after the service, to help make sure that our justice efforts reflect the passions of our congregation. You can give to this morning's offering by placing cash or a check in the basket, or by one of the options on your screen. Please make a note that your gift is intended for today's offering, and we will now gratefully accept the offering.
this rose will open. I know my fear will burn away. I know my soul will unfurl its wings. I know this rose will open.
Friends, we are a community that holds one another in our joys and in our sorrows. In our celebration and in our pain, we make the same promise to one another: we are with you. And we hold many things in our hearts this morning. Together we share the joy of Gregory, who's moved into a new apartment, and Jody, who is recovering from a virus. We share these celebrations and also all of the joys and the sorrows that lie in the silence of our hearts. So for all these things, we will drop a pebble in the water and say to one another that we are with you. Will you say it with me? We are with you. And now is the time for religious education. So if you're a child and you're heading downstairs for RE, you can move toward the stairs and then go down with Miss Kaya.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the love of all surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
And I invite you now into a time of centering and meditation, followed by some shared silence. I would remind us that by silence, we mean, of course, the absence of grown-ups talking to one another, so that we can listen more closely to the sounds of life, to the wind whistling outside the windows, to the wiggles and giggles of our children downstairs, to the breath of the neighbor in the seat beside us, to the beating of our own hearts. I invite you to take a deep breath in. Let it out. Let your shoulders fall away from your ears. Perhaps your eyes fall closed. And feel held and supported by the good earth beneath you. The theologian Howard Thurman described marginalization and oppression like a wall across humanity, slicing up its belovedness. He said, "Whatever it may do, for those who dwell on either side of the wall, one thing is certain: it poisons all normal contacts of those persons involved. The first step toward love is a common sharing of a sense of mutual worth and value. This cannot be discovered in a vacuum or a series of artificial, hypothetical relationships." He believed, and we do too, that real and actual relationships of love are necessary to destroy the walls between us. Picture as you breathe that wall of injustice dividing us from one another. As you inhale, I invite you to imagine lifting up one brick from the wall. And exhale, turning to the side to set it gently down. Then inhale, lift another. And exhale, set it aside. This will take a lifetime, you're thinking. And maybe yes, But you notice also in your imagination that you're not alone, that scores of us breathe alongside you in a steadfast tenderness, moving brick after brick after brick.
Spirit of love, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. In the hand, giving light the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of light, come to me, come to me.
I love a UU cult joke, as established. Yes, I would like to hear yours after the service. It's the kind of joke that's great because, as I said, it cuts just enough at the parts of us that aren't all that tender. Like, yes, we're a small movement. Yes, we have some pretty non-traditional practices for a Protestant-descended denomination. And even with the best bookmarks, we are not great at knowing how to talk frankly about who we are and what we do here. And as I said earlier, it's funny without slicing too hard because the main function of a cult is that it's a high control organization. And not in our wildest dreams, right? For example, since our COVID shutdown 5 years ago, my office downstairs has been a storage room for archives and office supplies, a couple dozen chairs, at least a couple dozen mice. Do you think if I had the authority of a charismatic cult leader? Come on. More to the point, our polity, the way our movement is structured, does not lend itself to high control from leaders. There's no ladder of authority in Unitarian Universalism. The highest authority is the congregation. Congregations hire and fire and ordain. Congregations choose to assemble or disassemble at will. We are painfully democratic. And that's on purpose. That's not an accident of history. It's reflective of our theology. Universalism is about a love that moves laterally, not hierarchically. A love that moves among us, not above us. A love that leaves no one out. Hierarchies of authority in organizing ourselves would violate the primacy of that central belief. Nevertheless, we do seem to be in the midst of a sort of culting of America. And when I say in the midst here, I mean historically, like over the span of a generation, not just the span of the last couple weeks. We've seen the rhetoric and behavior of high control relationships permeate our political sphere, our social spaces, including especially social media spaces, our churches, and sometimes even our families, right? This is maybe something you're thinking about. If you're working on how to communicate with family and loved ones through the impending holiday season, in the wake of the election especially, if they are using this type of rhetoric and behavior. How do we sit at Thanksgiving tables in a couple weeks and talk to our dads, our sisters-in-law, our weird uncles, maybe even our spouses, when it feels like we're not speaking the same language anymore? How do we maintain a loving relationship when it feels like we live on a different planet? And should we? Let's start with an easier question, first of all. What is a cult? First of all, as much as I love a good cult joke and a good cult documentary, as much as I've said the word cult in the last 25 minutes, when we're being serious about cultiness, I think maybe it's not the most useful word. Like, I'm all for speaking truth to power, but when its connotation is binary, you're either in a cult or you're not. You either are a cult or you're not. The real world looks much more gray. Some groups have culty behavior some of the time, but not all of the time. Then maybe we can shift our language to be more effective. What I mean when I call the Trump movement cult-like, or Christian fundamentalism, or of every variety, or MLMs, or a lot of social media spaces, many fitness organizations, plenty of gaming communities, most abusive family dynamics, what I mean is that they are high-control relationships, built on a hierarchy of love. I list all of these examples together because they are connected issues in America. But the primary thing that they have in common is that they equate love with control, salvation with control, goodness with control. And we don't actually have to use my definition of a high control relationship because much smarter people have studied and written about these dynamics. Stephen Hassan developed probably what is the most famous "is it a cult" assessment for high control groups, including domestic abuse relationships, in the BITE model. Maybe you've heard of the BITE model. High control relationships and groups will exercise control, he said, over at least one category: your behavior, the information you have access to, your thoughts, and your emotional responses, BITE. Michael Langone, who has a PhD in cultic studies, not a thing I knew you could get until last week, wrote this checklist of red flags for high control groups. Here's what he asks. Does your group show unquestioning commitment to its leader? Are doubts and questions discouraged or punished? And the most common way is through thought-terminating cliches, like a little phrase that stops questions. Are mind-altering techniques such as meditation, chanting, speaking in tongues, sleep deprivation, or overwork used in excess? Does the leadership dictate how members should think, act, and feel, how they should dress, what their bodies should look like, where they should live, who they should marry? Does the group feel missional? Do they have a special purpose? Does the group have an us versus them mentality? Does the leadership induce feelings of shame or guilt in order to execute control of members? And often this is done through peer pressure or more subtle forms of control. Does the group encourage members to cut ties with family and friends, or to radically alter the personal goals and activities that they had before they joined? Is there shunning? Is the group preoccupied with recruiting members or bringing in money, or both? And do you fear backlash? We're back to shunning. Do you fear backlash if you leave or consider leaving the group? So we can see how all those relationships I listed before, including, and all connected to, the burgeoning American fascism movement, follow the high control playbook in most ways, right? So coming back to the question at hand, how do we talk to people enmeshed in those groups? How do we talk to our family at Thanksgiving? First of all, let's start with, you don't have to. You need to approach any relationship with a high propensity for conflict or abuse by setting the boundaries that keep you safe, and only you can figure out what those are. If your loved ones refuse to use the right pronouns for you and your kid, refuse to accept your full humanity, if they're a net harm to you, this is not me telling you to go sit at their table anyway, okay? So first things first, stay safe. We need you to be here. The relationships I would ask us to consider staying in, even leaning into, even when they're feeling culty, are close, loving relationships with a mutuality of trust where your safety is not at risk. Like, we're not changing the hearts and minds of our mechanic or Jimmy from accounting, or, hear me when I say this, random strangers on the internet. In those cases, I want us, in those cases where you have a close, loving relationship, right? I want us, who are mostly white middle-class Americans, who may have some credibility in those communities, to consider leaning in rather than piecing out. So here's what we're not going to do. What I do not mean by leaning in is starting fights. And as someone who historically loves to start a Thanksgiving table debate about what Jesus actually said and did with my more fundamentalist Christian relatives, believe me when I say I understand the effort it takes to squash the impulse to start shit. Hear that when I say don't start shit. Not because we value order and civility, not because we care about being polite more than about what is right, but because it doesn't actually work. You can't actually yell somebody out of a cult. You can't reason people out of high control relationships either. High control relationships utilize thought control in a way that makes yelling and even reasoned debate trigger a defense mechanism, shutting down all doubt. As a matter of fact, even outside of authoritarian relationships, no matter how flexible or open-minded we think we are, it is a function of the human brain to instinctively double down on a current worldview in the face of a different one. In the 70s, cult rescuer was an actual profession. Like, you could hire someone to forcibly, often violently, kidnap your loved one who had joined a cult, lock them in a room for a week or more to deprogram them, often violently. And it's not a job anymore, because you know what most of those rescued people did? You know, right? Immediately returned to the cult, with even more fervor than before. We can't force someone out of a high control dynamic. Can't yell them out, reason them out, debate them out. But what we have learned in the past 50 years is that if we had a close, loving relationship to begin with, we can sometimes love them out. So what do we do? First, I think we have to change the way we think about people who enter high control relationships. We talk about cult joiners, fundamentalists, and abuse survivors like they have a unique character flaw. In reality, we need to accept that everyone is susceptible to high control tactics. The biggest reason I love UU cult jokes is because they keep us humble about our vulnerability to control. And we need to get off our high horse if we have any hope of being a safe landing place for someone who is exiting that kind of relationship. Cult recovery therapist Roseanne Henry put it this way: when ex-members of high control groups had been polled, they consistently gave these as the top 3 reasons for joining those groups: idealism, friendship, and love. People don't join cults. They get involved in groups and relationships that they believe represent their highest ideals. And that's all of us. I can't tell you how many times in my life I've heard people look at someone, usually a woman, trapped in a cycle of abuse, and say, why doesn't she leave? She's a smart person. How did she get caught up with someone like that? Or, I would never allow someone to treat me like that. You've heard it, right? And let me tell you, those little quips became the voice in my head when I found myself as a young adult in an abusive relationship. It was hard enough to call for help, to leave that situation. There was no world in which I could have brought myself to call on someone who'd ever made those judgments out loud to me. What I'm trying to say is the exit costs for leaving a high control group or relationship are steep. And anything we do to make it steeper, especially if it's piling on shame, keeps people in. So if we're going to stay in relationship with people in high control groups, I'm not saying we need to suspend all judgment, right? Sometimes they'll say and do things that are morally wrong, and we shouldn't make ourselves comfortable with immorality. What we should do is suspend the one judgment that couldn't be us, that we are anything but just as vulnerable to ideologies of control and a whole lot more lucky. Next, I want us to let curiosity be the guiding force of our conversations if we're having them. Because sometimes we hear something from a loved one that is absurd, misinformation, morally repugnant, and our instinct is to say, "You're wrong, dude." See earlier my propensity to start shit. By all means, say that in your heart. Do let your moral compass serve you. But leaping to correction, debate, or defiance out loud only strengthens the us versus them mentality, the thought-terminating cliches, and the perceived victimhood that is ingrained in these groups. And what dismantles a thought-terminating cliche is curiosity. Don't let the thought terminate. Tell me more about what you think about that. How did you find that out? What makes you feel that way? Why is this important to you? Curiosity does not equal agreement, but it does build trust. And it's not available in high control relationships. So if you can lead conversations with curiosity, you may be the only source of it in someone's life. Next is a tip from my friend Anna, who is a specialist in helping people leave domestic abuse. In these conversations, she suggests we're going to mirror back the dissonance we hear. So, for example, I hear you care so much about X. How does that fit with your belief about Y? And where someone may be experiencing the control of thought-terminating cliches, we need to be open about what we're unsure about, what we're still learning, where we're open to change. Where they're experiencing extreme pressure not to challenge authority, we need to be vocal in all the ways we disagree in love. Your modeling of loving differences of opinion with politicians you voted for, with your friends and family, with the pastor of your church, normalize loving disagreement. Normalize a flexibility of mind. Model the joy of community that is not built on control. And let the dissonance speak for itself. Because that's the thing we cultivate here that might make our presence a safe exit ramp for some people. The thing all these relationships have in common, fascist movements, fundamentalist religions, MLMs, domestic abuse, is that they equate love with control. And at the very heart of our faith is a belief that there is no hierarchy of love, that there are no conditions of our worthiness for love, not a single one. That is universalism. Maybe our joy in the love that leaves no one out can save more than just us. And I know it's a big maybe. I have to be honest with you, I don't know if this is the right message to preach today, really. Maybe turning all our energy toward one another and the protection of vulnerable communities is the more effective thing to do. This is a strategy of love that might not work. Throughout his life, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was questioned on whether his ethic of love through nonviolent resistance actually worked. He was questioned both by people more radical and more moderate than he was about whether this was an effective strategy. And by the end of his life, in some of those answers, you hear some doubt creep in. It might not work, he would allow. This ethic of love might not work, to change the world. But he never wavered in his conviction that, however effective, it was the right way to live. He remained committed to it to his death, not because he was unfailingly confident that love would work, but because he knew for certain that love was right. So maybe people really can be saved by a love that looks like belonging instead of control. And maybe not. But love is right, whether it works or not. So I think I'm choosing love. You with me? May it be so. And amen.
Red lights are flashing on the highway. I wonder if we're ever gonna get home. I wonder if we're gonna ever get home tonight. Everywhere the water is getting rough. Your best intentions may not be enough. I wonder if we're gonna ever get home tonight. If you break down, I'll drive out and find you. If you forget my love, I'll try to remind you. Stay by you when it don't come easy. I don't know nothing except change will come. Year after year, what we do is undone. Time keeps moving from a crawl to a run. I wonder if we're gonna ever get home. You're out there walking on the highway and all of the signs get blown away. Sometimes you wonder if you're walking in the wrong direction. But if you break down, I'll drive out and find you. If you forget my love, I'll try to remind you and stay by you when it don't come easy. Don't come easy. So many things that I had before, they don't matter to me now. Tonight I cry for the love that I've lost and the love I've never found. When the last bird falls, the last siren sounds, someone will say what's been said before. It's only love we were looking for. But if you break down, I'll drive out and find you. If you forget my love, I'll try to remind and stay by you when it don't come easy, when it don't come easy.
Let us close with these words from the poet Hafez. Out of a great need, we are all holding hands and climbing. Not loving is a letting go. Listen, the terrain around here is far too dangerous for that. Would you join with me in our closing hymn? Number 95 in the gray hymnal, There's More Love Somewhere.
If you are with us today on Zoom and would like to wave goodbye at the end of the service, you can turn your camera on now. And please join me in our chalice extinguishing words. Do we have people up? There they are. Hello, everybody. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.